What if your best friend lived just across the river, but the world said you weren't allowed to speak to him? This is the story of Clara, a young girl who dared to ask, why are we still building walls when we could be building bridges instead? If you've ever felt different, silenced, or brave enough to speak up, this story is for you. My name is Clara May Bennett, and I was 9 years old when the world started to shift under my feet. Not all at once, not with a bang, but like a slow crack spreading across glass, subtle and dangerous. I lived in a tired little town called Willow Ridge, the kind where the sidewalks knew your name and the screen doors never stayed shut in the wind. Willow Ridge was wrapped in stories, in secrets, in whispers. And those whispers had weight, especially if they came from the wrong side of the river. It was the Maple River that divided our town in two. On our side were the clean white fences, the corner stores, the church bells, and the porch swings. On the other side were dirt paths, rusted signs, and homes with peeling paint. People on our side called them the others, like they weren't even part of Willow Ridge at all. It was on a warm April morning that I first saw him. He stood at the far end of the bridge, a thin boy in a buttoned-up shirt 2 sizes too big, holding a worn-out book in one hand and a backpack in the other. His skin was dark, his hair was short, his shoes were muddy, and he looked alone. I was swinging my legs on the porch when Aunt Josie came out with her coffee and saw me staring. "Don't go looking at him too long, Clara," she said, barely glancing in his direction. "That boy's trouble, even if he ain't done nothing yet." I looked back at her, puzzled. But he's just standing there. Aunt Josie took a long sip of her coffee. "That's how it starts. Standing, then walking, then mixing. You remember what Pastor Graham says, each to their place." "But what if his place is with us?" I asked. Aunt Josie blinked at me, surprised. Then her lips thinned. "Go fetch your spelling book." But I didn't. Instead, I waved. The boy didn't wave back. He just looked at me, like no one had ever waved at him before, and then kept walking. That evening, I asked my father about him. "He's new," Daddy said, wiping oil from his hands in the garage. "Name's Elijah. Moved in with his mama over in the blue house, across the river." "Why don't people like him?" Daddy paused. "Because people are afraid of what they don't understand. And sometimes, Clara, they pass that fear down like an old family recipe." "That doesn't make sense." He looked me in the eye. "Most fear doesn't." Monday morning, Elijah walked into our classroom. Our teacher, Miss Hensley, smiled too tightly. "Class, please welcome our new student, Elijah Thomas. He'll be joining us for the rest of the year." No one said a word. Elijah sat at the back next to the dusty globe and the pencil sharpener that never worked. At lunch, he sat alone. At recess, he walked the track by himself. I watched from afar, unsure if I should approach. But something in me kept nudging, like when you know you've left something important behind and can't rest until you go back for it. So the next day, I did. "Hi," I said, standing awkwardly with my lunch tray. He looked up. "Hi. Can I sit here?" He hesitated. "You sure you want to?" I nodded and sat. "I'm Clara. I like peanut butter sandwiches, stories with ghosts, and I'm terrible at math." A corner of his mouth twitched. "I'm Elijah. I like books about people who change the world, and I'm okay at math, but bad at making friends." "You're not bad," I said. "You just haven't met me yet." That was the first real smile I saw on his face. 2 weeks later, Miss Hensley assigned us a history project. "You'll work in pairs," she said, "to present a moment in history that changed the world." When she paired me with Elijah, The class buzzed with whispers. Lucky her, someone muttered. She's just doing it for attention, another said. But I didn't care. At the library, Elijah pulled a thick book from the shelf. Let's do our project on Thurgood Marshall. Who's that? I asked. He grinned. Exactly. That's why we should. We spent hours after school working on it. Elijah spoke with passion, his voice calm but full of fire. He talked about courts, laws, freedom, and dignity. One evening, while coloring a poster in my living room, I asked him, "Why do you read so much about justice?" He didn't look up. Because people like me don't get it by accident. We have to fight for it. I didn't fully understand then, but I never forgot those words. Spring rolled in like a slow song. Elijah and I had become real friends by then. Not just school friends, real ones. We shared sandwiches, thoughts, and dreams. Sometimes we sat on the stone steps of the library after class, talking about the kind of world we wanted to live in. He said he wanted to be a lawyer. Like Thurgood? I asked. He nodded. Only louder. But the world we lived in didn't like loud boys from across the river. One Thursday morning, we were met with murmurs, eye and sideways looks as we walked into school. The hallway felt colder, tighter. Elijah's name was on everyone's lips. He stole Lacey Munro's bike, someone whispered. She saw him do it. Probably hid it behind that shack near the river. Lacey Munro, the mayor's niece, with curls that bounced when she lied and a talent for theatrics. Elijah was called to the principal's office before he could even put his bag down. I followed. Inside, Principal Daniel stared at him over his glasses. Sheriff Dale leaned against the wall with arms folded. "You want to tell us why you took that bicycle, son?" the sheriff asked. Elijah's face was calm. "I didn't take anything." Principal Daniels narrowed his eyes. "Lacey says otherwise. And given the circumstances, I think you should be honest." I stepped forward. "He didn't steal it. We were in the library all afternoon yesterday. Ask Mrs. Clifton. She saw us." The adults looked surprised that I was there, surprised and mildly annoyed. Sheriff Dale squinted at me. "Now, Clara, we appreciate your spirit, but sometimes kids stick together in ways that don't help truth come out." "I'm not lying," I said, louder than I intended. "He didn't do it." But they'd already made up their minds. Elijah was suspended that day, not because they had proof, but because the town didn't need proof, only a story that made sense to them. That evening, I sat on our porch swing, holding back tears. Daddy sat next to me, polishing a wrench with an old rag. "I did what I could," I whispered. "Why won't they listen?" He sighed. "Because sometimes, Clara, people don't want truth. They want comfort, and lies are more comfortable than change. But it's not fair." He nodded. "No, it isn't." I looked up at him. "Did you know?" He paused. "I hoped things were getting better. I see now they haven't changed much." The next morning, the bike was found, propped neatly behind the Munro garage. Turns out, Lacey had forgotten where she'd left it. But the damage was done. No one apologized. No one told Elijah they were wrong. They just went quiet. And silence, I learned, can be more violent than words. That Sunday, Pastor Graham stood tall behind the pulpit, his voice like gravel wrapped in honey. "We are a community bound by truth, righteousness, and order," he said. "But we must also remain cautious of those who do not share our ways." I sat in the third pew beside Aunt Josie, my dress ironed, my mind burning. I could feel every glance and whisper behind me. Elijah's name hadn't been said, but it floated in the air like smoke after fire. After the sermon, while everyone filed out for lemonade and gossip, I stood near the steps and waited. When Pastor Graham approached, I gathered every drop of courage I had. "Pastor," I said, "may I ask you something?" He smiled down at me, clearly amused. "Of course, child, what's on your mind? If someone tells a lie about a person, and that lie hurts them but no one corrects it, even when the truth comes out, what does that mean?" The smile faltered. "Well, that depends. Does silence mean agreement?" He cleared his throat. "We must sometimes let God handle justice in His own time." "But isn't that just an excuse for doing nothing?" His eyes narrowed just slightly. "Where is this coming from, Clara?" I took a deep breath. "From the truth." He didn't reply, just gave a short nod and walked away. That was the moment I realized something important. Adults don't always like hard questions, especially when they come from children. The next week at school, Elijah came back. He walked slower now, shoulders tighter, eyes cautious. No one said a word to him, not to welcome him, not to apologize. At recess, I found him sitting alone under the old oak tree. "You don't have to talk," I said, "but I'll sit with you anyway." He looked at me. "Why?" "Because sitting alone hurts. And because I know you didn't take the bike." "I know you know," he said quietly. "But knowing doesn't fix anything here." "What will?" He shrugged. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe time." We sat in silence. A breeze passed through the branches, scattering leaves like restless thoughts. After a while, he looked over. "Why do you care so much?" I thought about it. "Because you remind me of a book." He blinked. "A book?" "Yeah, one that's been shelved in the wrong place, judged by its cover. But inside it, it's the most important story anyone could read." He smiled for the first time in days. "You're strange." I grinned. "Thank you." The following Monday was our turn to present the history project. Elijah stood beside me, holding his part of the poster. Clean lettering, a drawing of Thurgood Marshall with the words, "Equal Justice Under Law." Miss Hensley gave us a tight nod. "Whenever you're ready." I took a deep breath. "This is Thurgood Marshall," I began. He was the first African American justice on the Supreme Court. But more importantly, he believed that the law should protect everyone equally, not just the powerful. Elijah stepped forward. His voice was soft but firm. He said, "Where you see wrong or inequality or injustice, speak out, because this is your country. This is your democracy." The classroom was silent, even the whisperers, even Lacey Munro. "And that's why we chose him," Elijah finished. "Because silence helps injustice grow. And speaking up might not change everything, but it's a start." We stood still, our poster between us like a flag. Miss Hensley clapped and a few others followed, but not everyone. After class, a boy named Curtis caught up to me near the lockers. "Why are you always defending him?" he asked, frowning. "Because he's my friend," I replied. "But he's not like us." I tilted my head. "Maybe we're not like us. Maybe he's more like the person we all should be." He didn't answer. Later that week, Elijah and I walked along the riverbank after school. The wind carried petals from the nearby trees, and the water reflected the sky in broken ripples. He stopped suddenly and said, "Do you ever wish you were someone else?" "No," I said after a moment. "But I wish the world saw me differently sometimes. Like more than just a little girl." He smiled. "I wish the world didn't see me as a threat." We sat on a large flat rock by the edge. The bridge loomed nearby, its iron rails rusty and bent. I used to think bridges were just for crossing, I said. But now I think they're also for connecting. Elijah skipped a stone. It bounced twice, then sank. Bridges only work if both sides want to meet in the middle. Then let's build our own, I said. He looked at me, his eyes tired but warm. You really believe one voice can change this town? I nodded. No, I believe two can. It was the Founders' Day festival, a big deal in our town. There were booths of sweet corn, local crafts, and a stage set up in front of the courthouse. Kids sang songs about patriotism and flags, and the mayor made his usual long speech about heritage and honor. Miss Hensley had selected one student from each grade to say something inspiring about what they'd learned this year. Somehow, I'd been chosen for our class. I stood backstage, heart thudding, the paper in my hand trembling slightly. Want me to hold it for you? Elijah whispered, standing just out of sight. I shook my head. I've got it. I walked to the microphone. The sun was hot on my dress. Hundreds of eyes on me. Some warm, some not. My name is Clara Hall, I began. And this year, I learned something important. I learned that silence isn't always polite. Sometimes, silence is the loudest form of betrayal. A rustle passed through the crowd. I learned that fairness doesn't always come naturally. Sometimes you have to fight for it. Not with fists, but with truth. My voice didn't shake. I watched someone I care about get blamed for something he didn't do. And even after the truth came out, no one said they were sorry. No one made it right. People shifted in their seats. I don't think that's what honor means. I think honor means admitting when we're wrong. I think real heritage is about growing, not staying the same. A pause. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. I walked off, chest pounding. Behind me, the silence was louder than applause. But Elijah? He smiled like I'd handed him back a piece of something he thought he'd lost. A week later, Elijah found a letter in his mailbox. A thick envelope with a golden seal and his name written in elegant, looping letters. It was from a scholarship foundation in a neighboring city. His science teacher had secretly nominated him months ago. He brought the letter to our oak tree, still sealed. I'm afraid to open it, he said. Why? I asked. He looked down. Because what if it says yes? I blinked. Isn't that what you want? Yes, but what if leaving is the only way I ever get to be free? What if I have to give up this place to become who I'm meant to be? I thought for a moment. Maybe freedom isn't about leaving or staying. Maybe it's about knowing your worth, no matter where you are. He nodded slowly, then tore the seal. As his eyes scanned the page, I saw his breath hitch. A long silence followed. I got it, he said, barely above a whisper, then louder. I got it! I laughed and hugged him. You're going to change the world, I said. So are you, he replied. You already are. The Monday after the festival, school felt colder. Some students avoided me entirely. Others whispered just loud enough for me to hear. Teacher's pet turned social warrior. She thinks she's smarter than the town. Maybe she should move to the other side too. Miss Hensley didn't say anything in class, but when the bell rang, she called me aside. Her eyes were calm, unreadable. I heard your speech, she said. I nodded. Was it wrong? No, she replied. But truth always costs something. Are you ready to pay it? I don't know, I said honestly. Good, she said. You're not supposed to be sure. That's how you know you're growing. Later that day, I found a note folded in my locker. It read, "You made people uncomfortable. That means you said something real. Don't stop." It was unsigned, but I recognized Elijah's handwriting. 2 weeks before Elijah was set to leave for the academy, we took our last walk along the river. The air was thick with summer, and dragonflies zipped just above the water's edge. "I don't know what I'm going to do without you," I said quietly. "You'll speak," he said, louder, stronger. "I'll miss you. I'll miss you too." We reached the foot of the old iron bridge, the same place where he once stood alone, on the other side, back when I was still afraid to cross. Now we stood in the middle, side by side. "This town doesn't deserve you," I said. He smiled softly. "Maybe not now, but maybe one day it will. And maybe kids like me won't have to wait so long to be seen." We carved our initials into the wooden railing, a small act of defiance, a quiet reminder. CH Twashi Pas EB. Built our own bridge. As we walked back, he said, "Clara? Yeah? You changed me. More than any scholarship could." I smiled through the lump in my throat. "Promise me something. Anything. Don't let the world make you small." He nodded. "Only if you promise to never shrink to fit it." The day Elijah left, the sky was pale and overcast, like it couldn't decide whether to cry or not. I stood at the edge of his front yard, watching as he double-checked his suitcase. Mrs. Bennet stood on the porch, wringing her hands, pride and worry etched deep into her face. Elijah saw me and smiled. "You really came." "I said I would," I said, trying not to sound like something was breaking inside me. He walked over. "You, okay?" I handed him a small box wrapped in brown paper. "Open it later." He nodded and tucked it into his backpack. We stood there for a moment, not speaking, just breathing in the space between goodbye and forever. "Clara," he said, "if I ever write a book, I'll name the first chapter after you." I laughed. "Just make sure I'm not the tragic character." "You could never be tragic," he said. "You're the kind of person who breaks silence like glass." The car honked. Mrs. Bennet waved from the passenger side. Elijah turned to go, then turned back and hugged me, tightly, like he meant it to last. "I'll write you letters," he said. "You better." As the car drove off, I stood in the dust and watched it until it became a dot, then a blur, then nothing. But I didn't feel alone. Not really. I felt like something had been planted in me, like truth had taken root. 3 weeks later, I stood at the school board meeting, gripping a piece of paper with trembling hands. Dad had driven me there. He didn't say much, but he'd nodded when I asked. That was enough. The boardroom was packed with parents, teachers, and town officials. Mr. Langley, the board president, wore his usual frown. I cleared my throat. "I am Clara Hall, and I want to talk about fairness." Some eyes rolled, others turned curious. "I'm in 7th grade. I've seen how some students are treated differently because of how they look, where they live, or who their parents are." I paused. My voice didn't shake. One of my best friends had to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. And when he proved he was brilliant, most people looked away instead of congratulating him. More shifting. A few murmurs. "We say we want to teach character. Then we should model it. If we want this town to grow, we can't keep watering the same roots and ignoring the others." Someone clapped. Just one person, then another, and then a few more. Mr. Langley raised a brow. "That's quite a speech, young lady." "It wasn't a speech," I said. "It was a reminder." 2 weeks after the school board meeting, I found a letter in the mailbox addressed to me in familiar handwriting. The return address read, Elijah Bennett, Ridgewood Academy. I tore it open and sat under the oak tree with the fading initials we'd carved. Dear Clara, I miss our river. I miss our tree. And I miss the way your words make people pause. Ridgewood is different, big, loud, full of questions and possibilities. Some of the kids here grew up in places where being smart isn't a surprise, where your skin isn't a warning, where curiosity isn't called talking back. I feel free, but I also feel strange, like I'm supposed to be grateful just for being here. And part of me is, but part of me wonders why kids like me have to leave home to feel like we belong. The science teacher here, Dr. Adler, gave me a microscope to keep in my room. It made me think of that time we watched ants carry crumbs across the sidewalk for an hour like it was a parade. I told him about you. He said you sound like the kind of person who builds bridges, not just across rivers, but across hearts. Keep building. Even if they don't see it now. Yours. In truth, Elijah. I read the letter twice, then a third time, and then I folded it carefully and tucked it into my notebook, the one labeled Voices That Matter. He was building his world, and I would keep building mine. The next Monday, something happened at school I didn't expect. When I walked into history class, a new poster hung above the chalkboard. It showed a single candle burning in a dark room with words in bold white letters. Justice grows where truth is planted. I looked at Miss Hensley. She just smiled and nodded slightly. Then she stood in front of the class and said, This week, we're starting a new project. You'll be researching unsung heroes, people who challenged injustice in quiet but powerful ways, people who didn't wait to grow up to do something that mattered. Whispers floated across the room. Can we pick local people? Someone asked. Yes, she replied. And I can already think of someone right here in this school who might qualify. Eyes turned to me. I felt my cheeks flush, but I didn't look down. I held my gaze steady. Later that day, I passed by the empty classroom that used to hold an overflow group of students, mostly kids from Elijah's side of town. The desks were gone. The door had a new sign on it, Integrated Learning Lab. No segregation, just learning. It wasn't a parade, no banners, no fireworks. But it was something real, a quiet shift in the current. And sometimes that's how change begins. Not with a roar, but with a steady, brave whisper that refuses to fade. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was helping shelve books at the town library, my way of earning extra credit. And there he was, standing in the doorway, grinning with his backpack slung over one shoulder like he hadn't left at all. Elijah? I blinked. What? How are you here? He laughed. Midterm break, just a weekend. I ran up and hugged him, forgetting I was holding 3 books. They hit the floor with a loud thud. I didn't expect you until December. Neither did Mom, he said. But I needed a break. And I needed to see the river again. We sat in the back of the library, in the farthest corner where the sun filtered through old windows and dust danced like magic. He pulled a small notebook from his bag and handed it to me. I've been writing, he said. Thought you might want to read the first few pages. I opened it carefully. The first page read, Chapter 1, The Girl Who Built a Bridge. My eyes filled. You really meant it. I always do, he said. We spent that day walking the same trails, talking about science and truth, and what we wished adults understood sooner. Before he left the next morning, he handed me a sealed envelope. Give that to Miss Hensley, he said. It's about something I think the school should try. Then he paused. And one more thing. I think you're going to be a writer someday. A good one. I smiled. I already am. You gave me the ending to the story I didn't know I was telling. 3 weeks later, the school hosted its first ever community reading night, a new event inspired by Elijah's letter and supported by Miss Hensley, the principal, and, shockingly, a few parents who had once opposed it. The auditorium was filled with folding chairs and nervous energy. Students were invited to read short passages from books, letters, or things they had written themselves. I clutched the speech I'd written. My hands were sweating. Miss Hensley whispered as she passed by me backstage, "Speak like the world is listening, Clara." Because it is. When it was my turn, I walked slowly to the podium. The lights made it hard to see the crowd, but I knew my parents were out there. And I imagined Elijah, even though he was far away. I began, "This isn't a story about one boy or one girl. It's a story about walls and what happens when someone decides they don't belong there anymore." I talked about our town, our river, our silent rules. I talked about how friendship can be louder than tradition and how sometimes one voice is all it takes to let others know they can speak too. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then, like rainfall turning into a storm, the entire room was on its feet. That night, I stood outside under the stars and thought, this is what hope sounds like when people finally hear it. It started as a school assignment, a personal reflection. Miss Hensley asked us to write about a moment that changed our thinking. I stayed up late for 3 nights, scribbling and scratching out words until my fingers hurt. I didn't want it to be neat. I wanted it to be true. When I finally handed it in, I didn't expect what happened next. A week later, Miss Hensley pulled me aside. "The local paper is printing your essay," she said. "They're calling it The River in My Town." I blinked. "Seriously?" "Seriously. And they want your permission to run it on the front page of the Sunday edition." That Sunday, the town woke up to something different with their coffee and morning routines. Right there, beneath the paper's masthead, were my words. "There is a river in our town. You may not see it on a map, but it flows through our schools, our streets, and sometimes even our hearts. It divides and defines us. But I believe rivers are not meant to divide. They are meant to be crossed." By noon, people were talking, really talking, about what had changed and what hadn't, about Elijah, about me, about the future. For the first time in my life, I saw adults reading something written by a kid and taking it seriously. It wasn't just a paper, it was a ripple. Months passed. Winter softened into spring. I stood at the river one afternoon, the same spot Elijah and I used to meet. The water shimmered in the sun, calm and deep. The bridge above it had been repaired over the summer. Stronger, wider, safer. That day, something else happened. The school installed a new plaque at the edge of the playground. It wasn't large or fancy, just a metal rectangle bolted into a wooden frame. But the words on it mattered. "In honor of those who speak truth, build bridges, and believe change begins with courage." It didn't say my name, or Elijah's. It didn't have to. We knew. The town knew. I got a letter from Elijah that week. His school wanted to publish his short story in their literary journal. It was called The Other Side of the River. He wrote, "Funny how we both turned bridges into stories and stories into bridges." That night, I sat down at my desk and opened a fresh notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote, Chapter 1, The Day We Stopped Whispering. And I knew something for sure. The world doesn't change all at once. But it does change. And sometimes it starts with just one voice, trembling but true, saying, "I believe things can be better." Questions for you. Have you ever felt like Clara, wanting to speak but afraid to? Who would you befriend if there were no labels walls, or rivers? Can you be the first voice in your classroom, your home, your town? Learn English through stories. Listening to stories like this one improves your vocabulary, helps you understand real conversations, and teaches you life lessons in a powerful, emotional way. Every time you listen, your brain learns faster. You don't just learn English, you feel it, you live it. Life lesson. Bravery is not loud, it is steady. It is choosing to build a bridge even when no one else is holding the hammer. Comment below. Which moment in this story touched you the most? Tell us what you felt. Subscribe to Epic English Stories. If this story moved you, imagine what the next one will do. Subscribe now. Turn on the bell and join a world where every story teaches, heals, and transforms.